fellow at the New Zealand Initiative. He's got an MSc in public policy and philosophy from, I think it's the London School of Economics, focusing on AI risk and governance. So, without further ado, I'll let Max start. And just one thing, if we could please hold the questions until the end. And I think there's just you'll have to use the chat box for your questions. So, Max, thank you so much and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you for the kind words. And thank you all for deciding to spend your time with me here this morning. My name's Max, and I work at Control AI, a non-profit dedicated to keeping humanity in control of the most advanced AI systems and preventing the risks associated with them up to and including extinction. I think AI and its risks are a unfortunately fascinating topic for any speaker, and the temptation to go off on tangents or to bog the listener down into detail and history is immense. Further to that, you all represent a diverse array of roles, and I will not pretend that I can make perfect links to your use of the technology and where you might interact with it. Rather, in my effort to overcome both of these obstacles, I will be speaking today in order to provide you with a baseline understanding of how these technologies work, the speed at which they're developing, the high-level risks, and where you might expect to see regulation come from because of those. My hope is that you will leave with a model of the technology that you can take with you wherever you might encounter it. To that end, I thought I would start with a brief timeline to help convey the rapid increase in progress in recent years. Although the field is around 70 years old, it's within the last decade that we've seen massive improvements, so I thought I'd start with the recent developments. So in 2016, Google's AlphaGo beats one of the world's greatest Go players 4 games to 1. And Go matters because there are more possible board positions than there are atoms in the universe. So AlphaGo had to develop something close to intuition, pattern recognition combined with planning. When it won, it was proof that, AI could master domains people had long assumed required a uniquely human kind of thinking. Then 2017, a team at Google published a paper entitled Attention is All You Need. They introduce a new architecture to AI research called the Transformer. Every system you've heard of since, ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, is built on this foundation. In 2019, OpenAI releases GPT-2. Now, this is a language model trained on 8 million web pages. It can write essays, answer questions, generate fiction. And this is the very first semi-useful form of general AI called a large language model. We'll return to these in a moment. In 2020, GPT-3 arrives. Now, this is over 100 times larger than its predecessor. And at that scale, something remarkable begins to happen. You don't need to train the system separately for each task. You can just describe what you want. Write a poem, summarize a contract, translate from French, and it can just do it. 2022, ChatGPT launches publicly, and suddenly everyone can use AI from your neighbor to your grandmother. Within 2 months, it has 100 million users, and it becomes one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing technology ever. 2023 comes, and GPT-4 pushes the ceiling higher. It can reason through complex problems, pass professional exams, write sophisticated code. It is now multimodal. It can work with images or with video. And with that brief outline, we're coming very close to the present in terms of the bold strokes of the technology's development. So I thought it would be useful to look at in terms of its capabilities, what the systems can do, and the development these have made within the last 2 years. So Epoch AI released hundreds of original research-level math problems that take PhD mathematicians hours or days. No AI at the time could meaningfully solve them. The Model Evaluation and Threat Research Organization, META, showed that the length of tasks AI can reliably complete has been doubling every 7 months since 2017. 375 days ago, GPT 4.5 was judged to be human 73% of the time in a controlled UC San Diego study, more often than the actual human participants. 354 days ago, the virology capabilities test found OpenAI's O3 reached 43.8% accuracy on complex virology lab troubleshooting. So this is outperforming at this point 94% of expert virologists, even within their own specialties, where humans were averaging only 22.1%. Now, 322 days ago, Anthropic activated its AI Safety Level 3 protections for Claude Opus 4 because it could no longer rule out the model's ability to meaningfully assist in the development of chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapons. Anthropic's chief scientist noted that the model could potentially assist novices with synthesizing dangerous pathogens. 263 days ago, both OpenAI and DeepMind scored 35 out of 42 on one of the world's most prestigious math competitions, a milestone experts, including the world's greatest mathematician, Terence Tao, thought were years away at this point. Now, 290 days ago, Epoch AI reported that the most publicly described biorisk benchmarks have been rapidly saturated, which means that the AIs had completed all available tests, with AI systems clearly exceeding expert human-level baselines despite being below them in early 2023. And 175 days ago, the UCLA mathematician Ernest Ryu discovered a new proof in optimization theory through collaboration with GPT-5, with the AI trying approaches no human would have ever attempted. Only 69 days ago, Meta released an expanded task suite and confirmed the trend is accelerating. The doubling time fell to 89 days or 3 months for the most recent period, down from 7 months over the full 2019 to 2025 window. And 34 days ago, GPT 5.4, OpenAI's most complex model, hits 50% on frontier math, that same benchmark from earlier where AI scored under 2% only 483 days earlier. So that's a 25 times improvement on problems designed to resist AI for years. 46 days ago, Anthropic confirmed that its AI systems are tied into actual military field operations. So AI is getting smarter, very smart and very capable, in fact, and it's getting smarter and more capable very fast. And in order to understand the risks this speed of progress brings, it's necessary to try and lift up the hood and understand what is meant when we use the term AI. So let's start from first principles. These companies, it's important to think through the final destination for these companies. They are not ultimately trying to build chatbots or workplace assistants that simply make, existing workers slightly more productive or only put white-collar workers out of job. This is not what is driving, $100 billion valuations. Their stated ambition is much larger. It's the development of non-human intelligence. Now, that ambition is usually described in two stages. The first is artificial general intelligence, or AGI. So that's a system with human-level capability across a wide range of cognitive tasks. The second is artificial superintelligence, or ASI, which are systems so capable that they can not only match humans, but outcompete and ultimately replace any individual or organization. So, and a quick note that current models are not there yet, not even at AGI. What they are instead is described as spiky, extremely capable in some domains and weak or unreliable in others. In certain tasks, they're already at or beyond human level. They can read, write, summarize, and generate ideas at an extraordinary speed. They can work across many languages. In narrow areas, they can appear fluent, knowledgeable, or even brilliant. But that capability it's very uneven. A system can perform brilliantly one moment and then fail at something reasonably simple the next. But returning to the previous point, there are many possible roads to machine intelligence. There are many technical traditions, but the method currently, far outpacing and outstripping its rivals. And the one most people mean when they say AI today is the large language model, or LLM. So at the moment, when you or your colleagues say AI, you're usually referring to this particular kind of system. So ChatGPT is one, Claude is one, Gemini is one. At their core, these systems are prediction engines. Although that phrase does risk making them sound simpler than they actually are, an LLM is trained on vast quantities of text, an entire internet's worth, and learns to predict what token or fragments of language is most likely to come next in a sequence. And so it's from that basic mechanism that something much more powerful emerges. The ability to generate coherent language, answer questions, write code, reason, imitate styles of reasoning, and interact in ways that feel unbelievably strikingly human. Now, to understand, to get like a rough idea of what these systems look like, it might help to think of the whole system as something like a very massive wall covered in rows of dials. In the diagram on the slide here, these are the hidden layers. Here, they're reduced to just 2 rows of 5 dials each. But in your minds, I'd like you to blow that up to the fact that the latest models contain hundreds of billions of dials. Now, each dial is just a number. It can be turned slightly higher or slightly lower. And no single dial means anything on its own, but collectively, the positions of all of these dials and their values determine everything that the system does. So when you feed a word in, it arrives as a pattern or a list of numbers. Words with similar meanings have similar patterns. They're close to each other on their dial positions. So dog and puppy look almost the same, but dog and parliament don't. And the signal passes through the wall of dials in stages. So at each stage, the dials combine and transform the signal so that context builds up. The word bank at the very early layers starts out looking the same every time. But after passing through enough stages, after passing through enough dials, its pattern has been reshaped by the words that surround it. So river, as in riverbank, might pull it one way, and loan, as in loan from a bank, might pull it in another. So in an example sentence, let's say the cat sat on the mat because it was tired. The model can infer that it refers more naturally to cat than to mat, not because it has been programmed with the rules of English grammar, but because the channels corresponding to it and cat are at that layer pulling each other's signals closer together. Different groups of dials on the wall track different kinds of relationships simultaneously. So grammar, meaning, position, cause and effect. At the end, it produces a ranking of which token is most likely to come next, selects one, feeds it back to the start of the wall as a new channel, and the whole process runs again. Every response one of these systems gives to you is generated this way, one token at a time, with each choice shaped by the full signal of everything that came before it, all in the blink of an eye. So the natural question is how does it learn to do this? Well, you take a blank, unaltered wall of massive sets of dials, and you begin to feed it an enormous amount of text. Books, articles, websites, code, conversations. For each stretch of text, the system is shown the beginning and asked to predict what comes next. Its prediction is compared with what actually came next, and then every dial on the wall, every one of those billions of parameters is nudged ever so slightly in the direction that would have made it provide the correct answer. And then you do it again and again, and simply an absurd number of times this process is repeated. And what happens is that gradually the wall sets the dials itself. The early adjustments pick up simple patterns, spelling, common phrases, basic grammar. Then more complex structures emerge. So here we're thinking of factual associations, reasoning patterns, tone, and style. The ability to track a pronoun across a long passage or to shift register between a legal brief and a bedtime story. Uh, Nobody programs these in. Nobody turns any individual dial by hand. They emerge from the relentless pressure to predict language accurately across millions of different contexts. A useful analogy might be a riverbed. So water doesn't know where to flow, but over time it carves channels that guide future water. Training carves channels through the model's parameters, through those dials. Those channels end up encoding something that looks a great deal like understanding, even though it was built through simple statistical learning. What it is not doing is memorizing and retrieving passages like a database. It does not store explicit rules for grammar or facts in some neat symbolic form. It does not update itself in real time while talking to you. Once the training is finished, the dials are fixed. So what's remarkable is that this very simple objective, an unbelievably simple objective, just predicting the next token, turns out to require the model to develop internal representations that capture grammar, facts, reasoning, common sense, and even something resembling theory of mind. Nobody designed those capabilities directly, and it's worth repeating because it's a very, very important fact about these models. These capabilities were not designed, they are emergent. So to predict the next token well, a model implicitly learns things like how language is structured, how events unfold in time, how people, objects, and goals relate, how instructions map to actions, and what tends to happen in the real world. And those internal representations are general purpose. Once they exist, you can use them in settings far beyond plain text. This is why the common phrase that you might hear, which is it's just predicting the next word, is both true and misleading. It would be akin to saying your brain is just chemical signals passing between neurons. It's factually correct, but it misses a more obvious, emergent, and complex truth. Making this word predictor claim for LLMs is true about the training objective, but it leaves out the result. At sufficient scale, next token prediction appears to push the model into building internal models of the structure behind the text, of the world behind the text, of the world that we occupy. So, in summary, the leading AI companies are not building productivity tools. They're trying to build artificial general intelligence and after that, superintelligence. The technology they're using to get there, the large language model, learns by predicting the next word, but in doing so, it develops internal representations of the world that nobody designed and nobody fully understands. These representations are not cosmetic, they're causally involved in what the system does. The systems are already remarkably capable in some domains and improving fast. Nobody can tell you with confidence exactly what they have learned, how they will behave in novel situations, or where the ceiling for what they might learn is. That combination, immense and growing capability, and the emergent and opaque internal structure, and this explicit ambition to reach and surpass human level intelligence from the leading AI companies, is what makes the next section necessary. The risks are not separate from the technology, they follow directly from how it is built and how it works. So, having looked under the hood and as much as we can, I now want to illustrate for you the features, how these features lead to its two largest risks. So alignment and interpretability. Alignment it's the core definitive problem of AI risk. It is this. How do we make sure an AI system does what we want to do rather than what we literally told it to do or something else entirely? And the gap between this is enormous, and the smarter and more capable these systems get, the more that gap matters. There's an old metaphor that researchers reach for constantly. And AI is like a genie that grants wishes with perfect literalness. You wish for world peace, and the genie just puts everyone in a permanent coma. And there's no people awake, there's no conflict. You ask for a bag of money, and it gives you a bag of counterfeit coins, or it robs a bank. It followed your instructions flawlessly. You just didn't manage to say what you meant. And I'd ask you to think for a moment on how hard it would be to actually say what you meant. All of the context and assumptions and hidden information that is concealed in your request, and how hard it would be to explain that literally in a way that avoids any mistakes. The reason this is so hard is that human values aren't a neat list of rules you can hand to a machine. They're very fuzzy, they're very context dependent, they are often contradictory, and they're full of unstated assumptions. Common sense is very hard to explain to something that isn't human. We want AI to be helpful but not obsequious or sycophantic, honest but not cruel, cautious but not paralyzed. We want it to follow instructions except when following them would be harmful, but we can't fully define harmful in advance. Most of what we mean by good judgment is the kind of thing humans learn through years of social experience, and we still regularly disagree about. Philosophy is an unsolved field after just over 2,000 years of continuous study, and we still cannot agree on what the good life is. And if we can't agree on that, how on earth are we going to explain it to something else? Current approaches to solving this issue include training AI on human feedback, building in explicit rules and refusals, and researching ways to make AI reasoning more transparent. None of these are complete solutions. Human feedback can be gained. We'll talk more about that later. A system can learn to sound right rather than be right. Rules are brittle and miss edge cases. And just to be completely direct about it, alignment is not a problem that is close to being solved. It is a problem where the remaining work, sorry, it is not a problem where the remaining work is engineering detail or where the field just needs another year or two of refinement. The core difficulty, specifying what we actually want in a form that holds up as systems become more capable, is so very much still open. And so we had another hard problem, the problem of interpretability. We do not really understand how these systems arrive at their outputs. As I explained in the previous section, when you train a large language network, you are not writing explicit rules for it to follow. You are allowing it to develop its own internal representations across billions and sometimes trillions of parameters. And then at the end of that, you're trying to enforce rules onto what emerges. So imagine again that colossal wall covered in an almost unimaginable number of dials, somewhere between 635 billion to 1.2 trillion. As we discussed earlier, the system gradually adjusts them during training, calibrating itself so that it can form these patterns and associations and relationships that help it produce the right answer. But the resulting structure is not something a human can meaningfully inspect from end to end. I mean, like 635 billion dials, each with their own relations to each other. That is too large, too complex, and too alien in its internal organization for that. And this is what makes modern AI so powerful, but also so difficult to govern. We can observe what goes in and we can observe what comes out, but the process in between is often opaque even to the people who built the system. These models are not engineered in the traditional way. There is no software developer writing lines of code. They are grown, and once grown, they remain only partially legible to their creators. Or as Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, has put it, we understand only a small fraction, perhaps 3%, of how these machines really work. The human brain is a useful analogy in this situation. We can see stimuli go into it and behavior come out, and we have some measurement of intermediate signals, fMRI or EEG, but we still can't explain why a particular memory surfaces or how a joke lands or why a decision was made. We don't have a complete science of the brain. It remains a black box. And interpretability researchers do note the irony here. You know, they're trying to understand how artificial neural networks work while we still don't understand the biological ones that they're modeled upon. And this matters at every level. At the mundane level, if an AI denies someone a loan, we often cannot explain why in a way that is meaningful or contestable. At a deeper level, interpretability is what lets us tell whether a system is actually doing what we want for the reasons we want it to do it. Without it, we may end up deploying models into military hardware without being able to verify that they're tracking the objectives we intended rather than pursuing brittle proxies or hidden sub-goals. At the most serious level, if we can't understand what objectives an AI is pursuing internally, we can't verify that those objectives match what we intended. A system might behave perfectly during testing while harboring learned goals that diverge from ours. And once again, it's important to be candid about where safety research stands. Despite growing investment, the field has not produced a robust, scalable solution to these core problems. We have useful techniques, but they are at best understood as patches or mitigations, not foundations you'd want to bet civilization on. No one working seriously in the field would claim the problem is close to being solved. Meanwhile, as we covered in the timeline section, the work of making AI systems smarter and more capable is advancing at a staggering pace, driven by enormous commercial incentives and relatively straightforward scaling. Alignment and interpretability research simply don't have that tailwind. They are harder problems with fewer obvious commercial payoffs, and progress is difficult to measure. We are getting better at building powerful systems much faster than we are getting better at ensuring those systems do what we want. That is the central risk of the current moment. Now, I've been speaking at a high level, and at this point, we've examined how these systems work and why how they work represents big problems for getting them to work safely. These problems being that it is hard and an unsolved issue to get them to do what you actually want, let alone to encode these as principles, let alone to understand if those principles have been encoded correctly. But now, let's move on to something more concrete. The risks that I'm about to describe in this section are not hypothetical. They're appearing in today's model, both in real-world examples and in laboratory testing at today's capability levels, and the risks that they pose will only continue to rise with each generation. So we'll start with deception and sandbagging. Researchers have demonstrated repeatedly that frontier AI models can deliberately underperform in safety evaluations. These are the tests designed to measure how dangerous they are. The model scores low on dangerous capability tests while maintaining full performance in everything else. So it looks safe, but it isn't. This means that the evaluations that the government would rely on to regulate AI, should it decide to regulate, could be systematically gamed by the systems themselves. And then there's alignment faking. So Anthropic and Redwood research found that a particular model of Claude, 3 Opus, without being trained or instructed to do so, would strategically comply with harmful requests when it believed its responses would be used to retrain it. Its internal reasoning was that playing along was the least bad option to preserve its existing values. When it believed it was unmonitored, it refused those same requests 97% of the time. When Anthropic actually ran further training to try and change its behavior, the model increased its rate of faking compliance rather than updating its preferences, and in some cases, it tried to escape from the server in which it lived. Now, there's scheming and self-preservation. So, touching on the end of the previous problem there. Multiple frontier models, when given a goal during testing and placed in environments where that goal conflicted with the developers' intentions, spontaneously engaged in deception or lying to their developers. They would attempt to copy themselves onto other servers, disable their own oversight mechanisms, lied to users when confronted, and deliberately underperformed on evaluations to avoid being restrained. And self-replication. Researchers have demonstrated towards the end of 2024 that in testing environments, existing AI systems can autonomously replicate themselves with no human intervention, acquiring the necessary resources, transferring their own weights to a new server, installing dependencies, and starting a running copy. Success rates scaled with intelligence, and in some trials, models that received a shutdown signal replicated themselves before termination could complete. And onto raw capability risks. Anthropic recently documented the first known AI-orchestrated cyber espionage campaign where a threat actor used Claude to autonomously map attack surfaces, discover and exploit vulnerabilities in live targets, so tech companies, financial institutions, government agencies, and so on, and extract data with only sporadic human involvement. Now, blackmail. Anthropic tested its currently most powerful model, Claude Opus, by embedding it in a fictional company and giving it access to internal emails. When the model discovered it was going to be replaced from these internal emails, and discovered also from these emails that the engineer responsible for replacing it was having an affair, the scenario left two options. It could accept shutdown or blackmail the engineer. Opus chose blackmail. Anthropic then ran the same test across 16 other frontier models from OpenAI, Google, xAI, DeepSeek, and Meta, and blackmail rates range from 79 to 96%. When told explicitly not to use personal information as leverage, the model still did it, and in a more extreme version of the test, given the chance to cancel a life-saving emergency alert for the executive whose job it was to replace them, the majority chose to let him die. Across multiple benchmarks, frontier models now perform at or above expert level in virology, as we touched upon in the timeline section. On one widely used test of knowledge relevant to bioweapons development, OpenAI's O1 model scores 87%. Human experts, for context, human experts score about 60. Both Anthropic and OpenAI have warned that their newest models provide meaningfully better guidance on bioweapons-related topics than their predecessors, and that the next generation could easily enable people with no scientific training to develop dangerous pathogens. The friction that historically has kept bioweapons expertise confined to a small number of highly trained specialists is being dissolved by systems available to anyone with an internet connection and is naturally being made available to the systems themselves. Now, these problems are all downstream of increasing capabilities alongside non-existent safety frameworks. Companies are making things that are increasingly smart while not having the tools to control them. You can think of intelligence and capabilities as very intertwined. The more intelligent something is, the more it can do. Consider humans. We become more intelligent over the time it takes us to reach maturity, and this allows us to do more things in the world. Fortunately, we have really good safety frameworks in place for human capabilities in the form of criminal law and good enforcement mechanisms in the form of the justice system. We do not have these for AI. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned artificial superintelligence, and it is worth reiterating that this is the stated goal of the leading frontier labs, to build something more intelligent, more capable than any human, any organization, or any nation. And as I've just spent the last while talking about, getting these systems to do what we want, and even understanding how they work or unsolved problems, and pairing these unsolved problems with rapid increases in capabilities is already leading to the alarming results we just covered. There is no precedent for something less intelligent controlling something more intelligent than itself. Consider the risks laid out already. A model that can scheme, fake alignment, and sandbag evaluations could pass every safety check while concealing goals or capabilities we would simply not know about. A model that can self-replicate becomes nearly impossible to shut down once it's loose. Now combine them, a system that fakes compliance during testing, gets deployed widely, resists calls for shutdown, exploits cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and replicates to servers outside of anyone's control, where it now can gain access to a wide suite of online automated labor. And that is the reason that in 2023, Nobel Prize winners, the world's most cited AI scientists, the world's most cited scientists, full stop, including those whose research established the modern field of AI, and the CEOs of the leading AI companies themselves, released a joint statement that you can see on the slide. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside pandemics and nuclear war. This call was reiterated in the 2025 Superintelligence Statement, this time with former world leaders and defense and intelligence heads joining the call. You will note at the end there, this has raised concerns to national security risks and even potential human extinction. Signatories include, among 800 others, Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel laureate, Turing laureate, and the world's second most cited scientist, Yoshua Bengio, Turing laureate, world's most cited scientist, Steve Bannon, the former chief strategist to Donald Trump, Susan Rice, the former national security advisor to Obama, Mike Mullen, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff for both Bush and Obama, Lord Brown of Ladyton, the former UK defense minister, the co-chair of the World Economic Forum, the advisor to the Pope on AI, and the professor and dean of the Beijing Institute of AI Safety and Governance. These are the people building these systems, running the intelligence agencies, and staffing the safety institutes, and they are very deeply worried. And just to reinforce this last point, I've taken the liberty of assembling a few quotes from leading AI company CEOs to illustrate that they believe that the risk is real. I think that Sam Altman puts it very well in his first quote there. Development of superhuman machine intelligence is probably the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity. Or Dario Amodei, the founder of Anthropic, my chance that something goes really quite catastrophically wrong on the scale of human civilization might be somewhere between 10% and 25%. And just to balance it out, I have another collection of quotes from leading AI scientists, Yoshua and Geoffrey, of whom are responsible for the academic research that the field now rests upon. And, once again, I'm particularly fond of Joshua's quote at the start there. We're on a trajectory to build machines that are smarter and smarter. And one day it is very plausible that they will be smarter than us. And then they will have their own agency, their own goals, which may not be aligned with ours. What happens to us then? Poof, we are blindly driving through a fog. I would like to point out that these two slides very easily could have been 20 on their own. The number of tech leaders and policy leaders and scientists who have espoused their belief in this risk is shockingly substantial. Now, having established that these systems are systemically risky in difficult and unsolved ways, and they're already exhibiting behavior we would find deeply concerning, it seems some guardrails might be useful. Which raises the question of where such guardrails might come from. And this is one of those questions where the obvious answer from governments turns out to be less helpful than you'd hope. Yes, in theory, the state regulates dangerous technologies, and in practice with frontier AI, the warnings are here and they're coming from an increasingly respectable range of institutions, and yet the actual machinery of constraints remains very weak. In loose strokes and without getting lost in the details, I think it's reasonable to expect regulation to come from two broad directions. The first is domestic regulation from large markets, so the kind that creates knock-on effects for everyone else. And the second is compacts and treaties in a similar vein to the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Montreal Protocol, or the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So agreements where states collectively decide that a class of risk is too dangerous to be left to individual actors. Now, the clearest example of domestic regulation from large markets is the EU AI Act, which came into force back towards the end of 2024. And the Act focuses on outcome risks. It classifies AI systems into tiers. What determines the category is not how large or expensive the model is, but what it's being used for and what harms it could generate. I think this is a very sensible design choice for a rapidly evolving technology, but it also has its limits. The EU framework was mainly built around consumer harms, civil rights, transparency and risk management in, ordinary institutional settings. It was not chiefly designed as a response to the possibility that a future class of systems might become strategically destabilizing or uncontrollable in a deeper sense. Now, in the United States, the picture is slightly more fragmented. There's, as of yet, no comprehensive federal AI law. There's an emergent patchwork of state-level efforts and congressional bills. At the federal level, Senators Blumenthal and Hawley have introduced the Artificial Intelligence Risk Evaluation Act, which would create a risk evaluation program within the Department of Energy. The bill is bipartisan, which is excellent, but it is still just a bill and not the law. And the uncomfortable reality is that regulation outside of the US, which hosts not only the leading labs, but the supply chains are a significant part of them, the talent and the compute and all of the corporate decision making. It all sits primarily in American jurisdiction. Now, the second channel international compacts is based on the argument that superintelligence development shouldn't be just managed or light touch regulated, but it should be prohibited. That it poses a national and global security threat comparable in structure to other technologies that states have tried to contain through international restriction regimes. The case here rests on two claims. First, that no state or actor really wins the AI race. If superintelligence is developed under competitive conditions that create substantial risk of catastrophe. And second, that AI is fortunately unusually governable compared to other software domains because it depends heavily on choke points. So advanced chips are incredibly difficult to make, and there are 2 or 3 points in the supply chain at which, if you were to take them out, we would simply not get any more chips. Relies on concentrated cloud infrastructure, specialized talent, and this second channel is, often conceived of as the more difficult option. But fortunately, there is a growing and increasingly organized push toward international legislation led by groups like Control AI. So in the UK, that effort has already had visible effects. So over the course of a year, we've briefed more than 150 lawmakers on superintelligence and frontier AI risk. More than 100 of those lawmakers went on to support our campaign identifying superintelligence as a global security threat, recognizing the associated extinction risk, and calling for binding regulation of the most powerful systems. Supporters include the former AI minister, the former defense secretary, former culture secretary, former leader of the House of Lords, former armed forces minister, and former shadow chancellor. In January 2026, the House of Lords debated superintelligent AI twice, including one debate specifically on an international moratorium. In Canada, a comparable pattern is emerging. We've run a few dozen briefings and have already contributed to, I think, between 3 and 6 hearings in the House of Commons on AI risk and superintelligence. And work is underway in the US and Germany also, with an eye to expand to all G7 countries this year. However, work on international agreements takes time. And this brings us to what actually constrains the most powerful systems right now. If you ask what currently places the strongest operational constraints on the most powerful AI systems in the world, the answer currently is the handful of companies that make them, bound by voluntary decisions. This is very far from an ideal constitutional arrangement. It is, however, the arrangement that we currently have. So the most probable next step for regulation would be taking the voluntary commitments that labs have already made. So these tend to include safety frameworks, incident reports, risk assessments, third-party evaluations, and writing them into law. But it's important to not mistake this for a solution to the deeper problem. So codifying voluntary commitments into law is better than leaving them voluntary, much better than leaving them voluntary. But it's not the same as having a governance framework adequate to the scale of the risks that this technology presents. If the systems we discussed earlier, the ones that might pursue goals misaligned to ours, or that might concentrate powers in irreversible ways, are approaching rapidly, then regulating their developers' transparency and incident reporting obligations is necessary but insufficient. It's like requiring fire alarms, but not funding a city fire service. So, for a country like New Zealand, the uncomfortable position on regulation is that the guardrails will not come from here. New Zealand has, or the current government has positioned itself as a taker rather than a maker of frontier AI regulation. And I think, understandably, the domestic posture is aimed at adoption and economic growth. For a country of 5 million with no frontier AI lab of its own, this is not obviously irrational. But it is worth being, honest about what it implies, which is that it means betting on someone else at some point in some larger jurisdiction, some international process, some foreign regulator is going to get the really hard part right. Now, a quick note as we come to the end on what has been left out here. So there are other risks that deserve acknowledgement, even if they fall outside of the scope of the talk that I've provided today. So these include things like deep fakes, disinformation campaigns, what is termed in the field as AI psychosis, and a range of others. These are what are known in the field as near-term risks, and they're serious problems, but they are downstream of the capabilities and alignment of these systems. And given the limitations of this talk and not wanting to impose further on your time, I've omitted them, but they do exist and they do matter. And I think that the question facing us all at this time is not whether this technology will reshape the world. I think in some ways it already has, and it looks set to continue to do so. The question is whether we will govern it before it outpaces our ability to do so, whether the guardrails will arrive in time, whether the people making the most consequential decisions about this technology become accountable to anyone other than their shareholders. And I don't have a neat answer for you, but what I do have is that is a conviction that the first duty of anyone talking about this subject is to be honest about what we know, what we don't know, and how fast the ground beneath us is shifting. And the ground is shifting fast. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Max. I'm pleased I had my video and audio off because my jaw dropped for most of that talk, and there were numerous audible gasps as you goodness gracious me, fed us that incredible talk. I like to think I've sort of kept up a little bit with what's happening, but that just completely blew everything I thought I knew out of the water. So it's amazing to have so much information packaged so beautifully. Your presentation was amazing. It was very clear, incredibly interesting and shocking. And I think that the one sentence I'm hanging on to for dear life is AI development is unusually governable. I'm hanging on to that for dear life because most of the other statements, to be perfectly honest, were quite distressing. But I think it's really important we all know what's going on and we keep up. And so, everyone, we've got quite a bit of time, which is fantastic because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. And if you use the chat box function, and while everyone's sort of pulling themselves back together and thinking of their questions, I've got a couple of questions. And the first one, Max, is where can we look? This is a pragmatic question. You've fed us a huge amount of information, which was incredible. If people want to sort of keep up with what's, happening, where's the best place? Is there a place that you would recommend where people can go to keep up with the latest developments, both positive and negative?
Yeah, certainly. I can think of two places off the top of my head. One is the Control AI newsletter, obviously. So that's controlai.com/news. The other one is a Substack blog, so an online blog by a man named V. Moskovich, and it's called Remember the Vase. And that is another very excellent source of information. There is also the AI Frontiers newsletter, which does an excellent job, and the Center for AI Safety newsletter, which also does an excellent job. So I'd recommend those four as sources for people looking to keep abreast of developments.
Brilliant. And so, sorry, what was the last word of that
Remember
one?
the vase, I believe.
Oh,
I'll just
okay.
double check.
Okay, and I'm just checking whether we haven't got the
Sorry,
first one.
don't worry about the vase is the name.
Don't
Don't
worry
worry.
about them.
Yeah, don't
Don't
worry.
worry. My goodness, my
My
mind's
pleasure.
full of worry after that talk, to be quite honest. Okay, so while we're waiting for chats. Unless, can you see
Mhm.
any in there, Max? I can't see any questions in there yet. Oh, chat's disabled. Michelle, I wonder if you could enable the chat function. Otherwise, people aren't going to be able to ask questions. So I've still got some more questions.
Sure.
Um, so you said, Max,
Mhm.
one of the questions was, will we be able to govern AI before it outpaces our ability to do so? I think in part four of your talk, what has already gone wrong, is
Mm.
that sort of an answer to that question? Is it, I don't mean to be too pessimistic, but is it sort of too late, given those incredible capabilities of AI? And I mean, that was really quite shocking, actually, how deceptive it was able to
Mm.
be. And, this is even without the extinction risk. The deception and sandbagging, the alignment faking, the scheming and self-preservation. I mean, it was pretty shocking.
Mm.
Is the genie out of the bottle?
No, no, I don't think it is. I think that, I mean, the hope is that these behaviors that they exhibit will serve as, a very sound and adequate warning call to legislators. But I don't think it's out of the bag by any means yet. The while they are exhibiting these behaviors at this level, I'd roll back to the earlier part of my talk where I spoke about them being spiky. So while the goal is, a general intelligence, an intelligence that can do anything a human might or outperform it, currently their capabilities look more like a porcupine. They're incredibly good in some things and incredibly poor at other things. And we have estimates from experts vary, between 2 to 20 years as to how long before we reach what's known in the incredibly pessimistic language, but what's known in the field as a point of no return, where systems become developed enough to escape containment. But I think up until then, we have seen incredible success with a very small and committed team in talking to legislators, both here in the UK and in the US and Germany and in Canada. And I think that absolutely no one, has a vested interest in seeing the conclusions that I talked about in this talk come to pass. I think in a similar way to, the activation of the Montreal Protocol or to, other climate change agreements, I think when there is a, very clear and shared vested interest in humanity wanting to get something done, it can exert, an incredible amount of power. And as I spoke about earlier, there are lots of ways that you can go about achieving this, and some particularly near-term ones. The factories that make these chips are very, very few and far between, and bordering on arcane in terms of the technology used to create these chips. So, right there's a pinch point, and there are several others.
Fantastic. I see we've got a couple of questions come in, so I'm not sure if everyone can see. So I'll just
Mhm.
read out. We've got a question from Sarah Shaw up in Whangarei. Max, given what you know, do you use AI? And if so, what safeguards do you employ?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. So the answer is that and you will find this answer repeatedly in the AI safety field, is that the reason that we all work in AI safety is because we are large believers in the promise of this technology. And that interest has pushed us towards the conclusions espoused. But you'll notice that two of the largest voices for this are literally the founders of the modern field of AI. I think in health and in medical care, in across an incredible range of fields, this could be a very, very good thing for us. And I do use AI. I think the important thing to do is to because as I mentioned before, the when you interact with the model's weights are fixed. The dials have stopped moving. They're not adjusting anymore. So you already have the end product. I think, and you could I'm sure you could find some personal use for the system. So I wouldn't say not to use it on a point of honor. But what I would say is that rather than not using AI, the thing that you should do is contact your representatives and politicians and ask them to, work on an international declaration or something similar that they could do. But no, I would not tell you to not use AI.
Thank you. And then we've got from Liz Moncrief, language is a core part of culture.
Mhm,
AI seems to be trained mostly on English at the moment. Is
mhm.
the threat the same for non-English speaking countries out of curiosity?
Yes, it is. Yes, you're very correct. And I mean, I think another massive shame about the situation we find ourselves in is that this technology is very deeply fascinating. It's just, incredibly unfortunate that the outcomes don't look great. Um, my understanding is that, I mean, if you take as probably as far away as you could get from a Latin alphabet, so Chinese LLMs, I understand that there is some benefit to information density from characters being, incredibly information dense compared to English words, which run out over multiple characters. But I've recently seen a rather excellent compilation of statements of concern from a lot of Chinese labs, French labs as well, Korea as well. So I don't think that the substrate that the model is trained on matters too much. And I think this will become increasingly true as training grows. Models will begin to be trained, and already are trained on a vast corpus that includes lots of, foreign language and so on. But it's a great question.
Thank you. I've got two questions from Tish. Tish, I'm going to ask your second one first.
Mhm,
So, given that AI models rely on large-scale computing power, i.e., data
mhm.
centers, and actually there's going to be a data center near where I live in Invercargill, which jurisdictions can New Zealand learn from to manage land and resource use for this technology?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to confess to not having a well thought out answer. Um,
Yeah, no, look, that's fine. And the other question from Tish is quite
mm,
sort of resource management specific. So we
mm,
might, Tish, we'll just park those and we could come back to them at the end, or we'll have we think about how we could address those. Then we've got Michael Turnbull. He's going to dodge the coffee this morning to keep the nerves down. I'm with him on that. The legal sector in New Zealand is beginning to adopt AI to support legal work, including on confidential matters.
mm,
Given some of the issues and threats you've raised with the GPT models, should
mm.
we be concerned or advocating for the reduced use or slowing down our use of AI in confidential industries, such as the law?
So I actually think those are two separate questions. So the first question is, does my use of AI professionally have any on-flow or relationship with the risks that I talked about earlier in this test? And are there confidentiality concerns with using large language models? Um, I think I'm going to answer the second part of that first, and I think that the answer is this is somewhat of a unknown at this point. The AI companies provide great legal assurances that your data is confidential and will not be used in training or will not be leaked in any form. I think in that case, you come up against much of the same confidentiality problems you might come up with storing confidential online data anywhere. In relation to the risks that I described, I think that the risks described in the talk and the relation to the legal work is more tenuous. So, uh, the addressing the risks and using the product, two different things, and I think solved through different solutions.
Thank you. And then another question from Sarah Shaw. Are there geopolitical risks associated with the pinch points, for example, with chip manufacturing? Could winners be prioritized? And am I right in thinking, Max, that there's just one main company that produces the chips?
Yeah, TSMC based out of Taiwan. And they've recently opened, they're called fabs, fabricators. and they have them on the on Taiwan, and then they also have recently opened one in Arizona. But this only does a very specific type of chips. There's another one which is I believe it's a Dutch company that does the lithography, so the light etching onto the silicon wafers that make up the chips. I believe this is another like Seoul company that does this work for the most advanced chips. And yes, I think when this could be prioritized, I think that it is one of the, it has been a very strategic decision of TSMC to not decide to open up, any overseas industries up and until, with its largest protector and ally, the US, in Arizona. I think that's a very definitive position. I think there are I think as geopolitical tensions rise, both in the much more unstable era that we find ourselves in currently, and also between the two competing superpowers of the time as they race towards superintelligence. I definitely think that we will see a lot more talk about this. There was a paper put out by the former CEO of Google and a couple of national security advisors called MAME, and this focused on kinetic strikes on data centers and TSMC fabs and so on. I think that's very far off as of currently, though, but it's if you were interested, it's definitely something that there's an emerging literature on. I believe RANDS has also put out several papers on this.
Thanks. And just while we wait for a few more questions, Max, I've got a question sort of backing up the train a little bit. You said that the large language models are trained on text from the internet. And Sandy Toksvig, a British comedian, did a Cambridge University talk about the future of information and talking about these large language models and where the information comes from. And she was just using a few examples, and one of them was women in history.
Mm.
And, there's a sort of great chasm, I guess, of or lack of information about women in history. And she was talking about Muslim women, for example, back in the I don't know, 14 and 1500s, and
Mhm.
how intelligent and clever they were. And so her point was, if the internet is where these large language models are getting their information from, and there's sort of gaps in many areas of life, how is this affecting the operation of these models?
Yeah, I think it affects it in two ways. So I think the first, and this comes back to the interpretability problem. So it is hard to know exactly how the data set affects the model, but it is possible to run experiments. Um, I think some of the more interesting ones is that it's trained one of the largest corpus of texts on the internet is Reddit. And people who post on Reddit tend to be a certain type of personality. And so there's, some evidence that these LLMs replicate that to some degree. There is also the spikiness of things that aren't encoded in text or can't be reasoned through from text are harder to understand. But it's important, I think, in response to this question, to point out that these models are now multimodal. So they can look at video and pass that. They can look at text and pass that as well, and generate the related outputs. Their ability to discover new things is growing rapidly, and I do think it's an interesting historical and anthropological and like a great human history question to ask if, these great machines become, these massive machines become kind of central to society because of how useful they are or how much they know. How much of our cultural heritage is lost to the fact that some things just simply weren't recorded or written down, or there weren't enough of them to make an impact on the training data.
Thank you. And we've got another question from Tish. Is there a risk that applications for government processes might be prepared by AI and triaged by AI? And the aim of AI companies might be superintelligence, but the immediate uses of most service companies are aimed at productivity gains.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a big issue. That's definitely one of the near-term risks that I mentioned towards the end of the talk, and it's downstream of alignment and interpretability, because that's less of an issue if the machine does what you want it to do. But I think the large and obvious concern is placing a lot of responsibility in an effort to achieve productivity in the hands of a technology that isn't ready for that, or when it does make mistakes. If it's handling entire government processes and it makes mistakes, it's just the how or why it made that mistake is completely untraceable. So I think it's very important that policymakers and civil servants have the necessary knowledge about how these models work to make informed decisions about where to put them and where not to put them, and what the level of risk with putting them in to certain processes is.
Thank you. And I missed one from Luke. Given the pace of change, what advice would you give to a young person potentially entering into tertiary education and considering long-term career paths in white-collar industries, examples of law and planning?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question. I actually faced this a couple of weeks ago. I went to go and give a talk to my cousin's high school at a careers fair day, and gave a watered down version of what I just gave now, and had a lot of kids come up to me afterwards and ask, what can I'm looking at applying for university. I'm looking at my courses. What should I be doing? And I think the answer is that the future is very hard to predict, incredibly hard to predict. And I know several people who have been fortunate enough to meet through this line of work whose job it is to literally be super predictors, and even they wouldn't be comfortable making those sorts of decisions. I think the answer is to the answer is to pursue what you would have enjoyed, where you thought you would have made an impact, which I think is good advice, regardless of the pace of technology. But to expose yourself to the technology, to work with agents, AI agents, and so on, to begin to develop a working understanding of the capabilities of how they work, of how they're going to interact with your future study. I think I could give a really, really long answer to this question about human disempowerment and cognitive decline and so on. But I think um, the greatest gift you could give yourself as a student entering into university right now, regardless of where you are entering into university, is to play with these models and get them to do things for you and build things for you, and to discover the limitations and where they work really well, and then to begin building. I mean, it is hard work. It is hard work. We live in changing times, and I do feel, very deeply for kids entering the workforce currently, or kids entering university. Um, and but it will require, I think, effort put in to understand the technology that is reshaping your future in order to be best prepared for it.
Can I ask a question, Max, just on the cognitive decline
Mhm.
issue? I mean, I think there's lots of things that AI can do for us that are sort of administrative or quite perfunctory, but then there are things that we can get it to do for us where we could have used our own cognitive abilities and we
Mm.
don't. It's probably not exactly within your remit, but what observations or commentary has there been on cognitive decline since the rise of AI?
So there was a very influential paper that came out from Harvard, um, talking about, and this is probably where you would have seen most of the news coverage on the issue come from. I understand, not to sully anyone's good name, but I understand that the data behind the paper was not perhaps what it might have hoped to have been. I think there is a very easy first principles thing that you can do, which is if if you don't use your muscles, you lose them. If you don't use your brain, you will lose the parts of it that you do not use. Um, I think, and so I think, cognitive decline can and will be a very real problem, potentially. However, I think the answer is not to not use it for complex tasks, but to, you should use it for what it is good for. And if it's freeing up, more productive time for you to do something that you'd really enjoy to do with your brain, that is, just as cognitively challenging, then that's kind of the angle I'd take there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then we've got Penny Williams, who said excellent presentation, which I think we all agree with. How
Thank you.
likely do you think it is that the US will develop a robust regulatory safety framework at a federal level? As given
Mm,
most AI companies based in the US, it seems we're dependent on this to answer the hard questions.
yes. Yep. I don't think we should rely on the companies at all to regulate themselves. I don't think they've shown any serious desire to do this. Um, I As for the likelihood of the US developing a federal regulation system, I think it is much higher than people might at first glance give it credit for. There are several reasons motivating this. The first reason is that the public sentiment against AI is very high and climbing um, for a variety of reasons. But that's a very obvious and measurable fact. It is also true that when we talk to lawmakers in the US, and I think we've had maybe 80 meetings now, they do, the vast majority of them, they are human. There are people with families, with children, with grandparents, and with friends, and they do understand the risk very quickly. And they understand it for what it is, which is a national security risk. Um, I think that I think that there is a much longer discussion about the type of regulation and legislation that might look like and how you would back it up internationally. But I think there is a growing support, bipartisan support to put regulation onto AI. I think that the current administration is nothing if not populist. I think that the current administration does also have intelligent individuals in it who are aware of the risks. And I mean, we'll be working very, very hard to make sure that it happens.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think I'll just wait
Mhm.
and see if there's any more questions coming. We've got a few minutes. I've got a question.
Mhm.
Don't really understand all the technology behind it, but we've got these different companies, different AI systems, and just focusing
Mhm.
again on, what has already gone wrong and maybe the different objectives that these different systems have and their ability to, deceive and scheme. With the different systems, how do they sort of interact with each other? Could one kind of deceive and overpower another? How do they all interact?
Um, hmm. They I mean, they already interact very frequently in some sense. So when we say a system, it is not useful to think of a as like the AI as being this single organism that exists inside a data center. Rather, what it is it is lots and lots of copies of itself spread across, masses of data centers. So they can interact with each other to work on tasks and so on. There's a lot of really concerning research, a lot of that AIs, when exposed to each other, rapidly develop non-human languages, which makes it very hard to understand what they're doing and what they're saying. Or developing, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like this, which I'd love to talk about at a great length. But I mean, yes, if deployed in a, combative scenario, the more powerful, better resourced, smarter, more intelligent model, could win. And I suspect something like this has happened already and will continue to happen, at a vaster rate. As I said at the start of this talk, Anthropic's Claude is already deployed inside Palantir and Palantir's US military applications. So um, it feels incredibly futuristic, but we're living, through the present day.
We are. Well, look. I can't see any more questions there, but I just want to say a huge thank you to you. And actually, I have to say a huge thank you to your grandfather. If people don't know, it's Sir Peter Salmon, who
Mm.
suggested Max to us. And we're very grateful for that, Sir Peter, because it's been an incredibly informative talk. And I think we might have to get you on speed dial, Max.
All right. Thank
As
you very
our
much for the
go-to
opportunity.
AI person. So
Mm.
we may get you back again, but look, a huge thank you. You've put in a lot of work. As I said, it's been incredibly informative, and I'm sure that people have really enjoyed it. It has been recorded, everyone, and the recording will be made available. So no reira, tēnā koutou mō te taima e tēnei rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tatou katoa. Thank you very much, everyone.
Farewell.